The mastery of love. Don Miguel Ruiz. Imagine standing before a mirror that reflects not your physical appearance, but the quality of love you carry within yourself and offer to others. In this reflection, you see patterns that have shaped your relationships since childhood, the ways you speak to yourself, the assumptions you make about others' intentions, the degree to which you take their actions personally. What you witness in this mirror might surprise you, revealing how much of what you call love has been influenced by invisible agreements you made long ago, agreements that may no longer serve the authentic expression of your heart. Don Miguel Ruiz presents love not as a feeling that comes and goes with circumstance, but as a mastery, a conscious practice of being that transforms both how you relate to yourself and how you connect with others. At the heart of this mastery lie principles that challenge the very foundations of how you've been taught to love and be loved. These teachings suggest that much of our suffering in relationships comes not from love itself, but from the distorted agreements we've unconsciously adopted about what love should look like. The question that emerges for our modern age is profound. In a time when authentic connection feels increasingly elusive despite constant digital communication, how might returning to these fundamental principles reshape our capacity for genuine intimacy and self-acceptance? Consider first the power of being impeccable with your word, particularly in how you speak to yourself. You've likely noticed how the internal voice that narrates your daily experience can be either a source of encouragement or a relentless critic. Ruiz suggests that the words you use, both internally and externally, are not merely sounds or thoughts, but creative forces that shape reality. When you consistently speak to yourself with harshness, calling yourself inadequate or unworthy, you're actively participating in creating that reality. The word impeccable comes from the Latin meaning without sin, which Ruiz interprets as being without self-betrayal. This principle extends naturally to your relationships with others. You begin to recognize that the casual cruelties we often dismiss as harmless, the sarcastic comments, the subtle put-downs disguised as humor, the promises made without intention to keep them, are actually agreements to diminish love rather than cultivate it. Being impeccable with your word becomes an act of profound respect, both for yourself and for the sacred space that exists between you and another person. It's a recognition that words carry the power to either build bridges of understanding or construct walls of separation. The second principle, not taking anything personally, reveals perhaps the most liberating truth about human relationships. You've probably experienced the exhaustion that comes from constantly interpreting others' actions through the lens of your own worth. When someone cancels plans, speaks curtly, or seems distant, the immediate instinct is often to ask, "What did I do wrong?" Ruiz suggests that this question itself is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human behavior actually works. Every person you encounter is walking through life, carrying their own collection of joys, fears, traumas, and dreams. Their actions toward you are filtered through this internal landscape, not determined by your inherent value as a person. When your colleague snaps at you during a meeting, when your partner seems withdrawn after work, when a friend doesn't respond to your text, these behaviors are expressions of their internal state, not verdicts on your lovability. This understanding doesn't eliminate the impact of others' actions on your feelings, but it offers you the freedom to respond rather than react, to maintain your emotional center regardless of the storms that may be raging in someone else's inner world. The third principle challenges you to examine the stories you create to fill in the gaps of what you don't know. Not making assumptions requires you to become comfortable with uncertainty, to resist the mind's natural tendency to create narratives that explain ambiguous situations. You've likely experienced how assumptions can transform a simple interaction into a complex drama. Your friend seems quiet during dinner, and rather than simply asking if everything is okay, you might construct an elaborate story about how they're upset with you, leading to withdrawal on your part, which then creates actual distance where none existed before. This principle invites a radical shift toward curiosity rather than certainty. Instead of assuming you know why someone behaved a certain way, you can approach them with genuine interest, in understanding their perspective. This practice not only prevents many unnecessary conflicts, but also opens doorways to deeper intimacy. When you stop filling in the blanks with your own projections, you create space for others to reveal themselves authentically. The principle of always doing your best offers a pathway out of the perfectionist trap that ensnares so many modern relationships. Ruiz's interpretation of your best is beautifully nuanced. It acknowledges that your capacity varies with circumstances. Your best when you're well rested and at peace differs from your best when you're grieving, stressed, or physically unwell. This principle frees you from the impossible standard of consistent perfection while maintaining a commitment to genuine effort. In relationships, this translates to a kind of self-compassion that then extends to others. When you accept that someone else's best in a given moment might look different from what you hoped for, you create space for human imperfection without abandoning accountability. You can acknowledge that your partner's best during a particularly challenging time at work might not include the level of attention you prefer, while still honoring your own needs and finding ways to communicate them clearly. These principles converge in addressing one of the most pressing challenges of contemporary life: the epidemic of loneliness despite unprecedented connectivity. In an age where much of our communication happens through screens, where relationships often feel performative rather than authentic, and where the pace of life leaves little room for deep presence with others, the mastery of love offers a return to fundamental truths about human connection. The concept of domestication that Ruiz explores reveals how many of the relationship patterns you consider normal are actually learned behaviors that may not serve authentic love. From an early age, you absorbed messages about how love should look. Perhaps that love requires sacrifice of your authentic self, that conflict means love is absent, or that you must earn love through achievement or compliance. These unconscious agreements shape your relationships in ways you might not fully recognize until you pause to examine them consciously. Consider how this plays out in modern dating culture, where apps reduce complex human beings to curated profiles, where the abundance of options can prevent deep investment in any single connection. The principles Ruiz outlines offer an antidote to this superficiality. They suggest that true intimacy comes not from finding the perfect person, but from bringing your most authentic, conscious self to the relationship you choose to nurture. The foundation of all these principles rests on self-love, which Ruiz presents not as narcissism or self-indulgence, but as the prerequisite for loving others authentically. When you haven't learned to extend compassion to yourself, to speak kindly to your own heart, to accept your imperfections with grace, you inevitably seek these qualities from others in ways that can become demanding rather than inviting. Self-love becomes the wellspring from which you can offer love freely rather than strategically. As you reflect on these teachings, two key realizations emerge. First, that love is indeed a practice rather than simply an emotion, a conscious choice you make moment by moment about how to engage with yourself and others. Second, that many of the conflicts and disappointments in your relationships may stem not from fundamental incompatibility, but from unconscious agreements about how love should operate that no longer serve you. This understanding leads to a question that deserves your continued contemplation. What would your relationships look like if you approached them as opportunities to practice these principles rather than as sources of validation or security? How might your capacity for authentic intimacy expand if you viewed love as a skill to be developed rather than a feeling to be pursued? Tonight, as you settle into rest, allow yourself to imagine releasing the weight of taking others' actions personally, the exhaustion of filling uncertainties with worried assumptions, the burden of perfectionist expectations. Picture instead the spaciousness that opens when you commit to speaking truthfully, responding rather than reacting, and showing up as your authentic self. In this space, love becomes not something you chase or perform, but something you embody, a quiet mastery that transforms every relationship, beginning with the one you have with yourself.